So hello everyone, and thank you for joining today's webinar, Streamline Your Manufacturing Operation with ERPSolutions. On the call, we will be covering best practices for creating more efficient and effective manufacturing processes throughout your organization by leveraging Acumatica, the premier cloud-based ERP available on the marketplace. I'm Strati Moustakis, PC Bennett's content marketing specialist, and I'm joined by Jeremy Davish, one of our senior business consultants. Jeremy has years of experience assisting our manufacturing customers optimize their Acumatica experience to create the best results for their team members and their clients. He is an expert when it comes to analyzing our clients' workflow and then creating strong processes that ensure success in terms of how their technology addresses and handles their unique operations. So with that little intro, we're going to dive into today's conversation. And first, I'd like to let everyone in attendance on today's call know that to make this call as meaningful as possible to you, we'd really appreciate if you could send in any questions, whether you're using the Q&A feature or the chat feature. And this is going to help ensure that you're getting the most relevant information possible on this call. So please don't hesitate. Send any questions that you have around your manufacturing endeavors, and we will try to address those at the tail end of the call. So with that, Jeremy, thanks so much for joining us today.
Of course. Welcome. Thanks, Strati. Appreciate it.
Cool. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen and let's just have a little conversation about manufacturing.
Sounds good to me.
So I think a great place to start is going to be, how does the system, meaning Acumatica, handle discrete versus batch manufacturing?
Out of the box, native Acumatica is focused on discrete manufacturing, but we do have some opportunities available for batch manufacturing with e-workplace apps and some other manufacturing modules that are add-ons as well. So in general, discrete manufacturing is really where the majority of the effort's coming from.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Thank you. And so what order types are really available within the Acumatica manufacturing module? And can you give us a little one-to-one comparison in terms of what some of those might look like?
Yeah, of course. So, within the manufacturing module, we can essentially do a make to order, a make to stock, an engineering to order, a manufacturer production schedule where it's going to be a repeat order, or we also have some projects where we can build a larger project production schedule based upon requirements for that. So just as an example, a make to stock would be product that we want to keep on our shelves that we are then going to be turning around and selling or using later in a different production environment. A make to order would be when a customer calls in and they say, hey, we've got this specific requirement that we need to make. I'd really like, this particular product made in this particular way, and we can modify our bill of materials to do that and generate exactly what the customer wants. An engineer to order would be sort of one step above that, where we are actually taking the make to order item, which would be more of a standard item, right? And we would be modifying the configuration in that. And then the project is going to be consolidating all of those into one larger project where we can look at overheads and costing and budgets and additional information like that. So just to sum it up, the make to stock is what we have on shelf. The make to order is going to be, we make it regularly, but we don't keep it on the shelf. We've got the engineer to order where it's really going to be custom, and then the project, which is going to be a lot of custom. So
yeah, and so just to kind of dive into that a touch deeper for my own edification more than anything else, is there a difference in how the system that is Acumatica really handles those separate manufacturing processes, or is it kind of out of the box, you're able to do all of those different types of manufacturing processes?
Yeah, out of the box, we can do all of those manufacturing processes. Projects is its own module. But that does tie into the manufacturing and the production module. But making to stock, making to order, engineering, engineering to order are all going to be standard out of the box Acumatica.
Okay, that's great. Thank you for going into that detail.
Yeah.
And so I think the next question can be, when it comes to engineering and design, keeping strong processes in place for things like approvals can be really important for any organization, but it also tends to be done outside of technology, especially if a company doesn't have something like an ERP as that central source of truth, you know? And so can you please explain how Acumatica's workflow capabilities can streamline or automate this?
Yeah, here, let me put on my quality hat here now. And my background is in aerospace manufacturing with a focus on quality. So I am very, very familiar with quality requirements and approval processes, documentation processes. And one of the things that I am unfortunately very familiar with is managing documentation in multiple systems. One of the things that Acumatica allows us to do is integrate a lot of those approval processes for things like engineering change control. And we can have a process and an approval map where we can take those changes in a bill of material and we can send them down through and have somebody responsible for those sign-offs. We have revision control. We have identification about what changed and how it changed, when it was changed, who made those changes. Was it a quantity? Was it an item? And then having that out of the box approval process and the engineering control will then stop you from making a new revision without getting that process. So it really helps identify where those changes are coming from. You can put in a reason as to why that change was made. There's a lot of changes that we can make within that process to strengthen that workflow, right? Which is hugely beneficial when you don't have to go to an external spreadsheet or an external documentation and say, hey, why did we make this change? Or how am I manufacturing this? I'm using this revision now. Being allowed to have those revisions within Acumatica streamlines a lot of that, especially when you're in an audit and the auditor says, well, how do you know what you made? Well, this is the production order I used. This is the revision I used. This is the bill of materials. It's all very relevant.
Yeah, and so then just again, you bring up points that just make me want to ask my own questions. So for that auditor example that you were just talking about, now is there like an actual visual approval map that we'd be able to show and demonstrate how we are going through those approval processes?
There is, yeah. So we can within each revision, we can actually look and we can say, hey, here's the approval. This is what went through, or here's the approval process. And we can look at that approval process, see who is responsible or which group is responsible. Doesn't have to be a particular person because, sometimes people go on vacation, right? Or people change positions or jobs. So if we set it by the organizational chart and the company tree, we can have multiple people or a supervisor, assign that within that approval process. So.
Yeah, that's fantastic, especially for like you know, what's the word I'm looking for? Accountability throughout an organization as well as transparency. That's what I was really trying to get at. You're really able to see throughout the entire organization who has to manage what aspects, and you're able to hold people accountable and ensure that those checks and balances are all in place to ensure that you're serving your clients to the best of your ability. So that's really wonderful that the platform allows for that.
Yeah, one of the things that I try and push with a lot of our clients is we want to make Acumatica be focused on a role and not on a person, right? A lot of the times within an organization, we have Kevin does this, or Mike does this, or Bill does this, right? And at the end of the day, if something were to happen to them, we want to make sure that we have a robust system, and a lot of these workflows and approval maps put into place sort of force that to be position-based as opposed to person-based.
Yeah, sure. That's a really I think unique way of looking at it. I'm sure some people would encourage having that more person-centric approach, but if you do it role-based or even department-based, you're able to kind of have those checks and balances. For the example that you said earlier, if someone's out of office or something like that, you're able to figure out who's next in line. So I think the next area we can really dive into can be around, material planning and production scheduling. These are really crucial elements to increasing an organization's throughput and productivity. So how do our solutions like Acumatica enable teams to be more efficient and effective in this realm of business?
Yeah, so when we're looking at the manufacturing module, most of the time, it's encouraged to be getting the MRP, Material Requirements Planning module with this as well. So what that does is it allows us to streamline our purchase orders our manufacturing processes, our transfer processes. It allows us to set some requirements. Out of the box, Acumatica does have standard item replenishment, so we can use that for setting mins and maxes and low stock requirements and stuff like that. But MRP takes that to a much higher level, right? And MRP is going to take into account the production order that's being created. If there's any sub-assemblies or any requirements that are going to come into that, it's going to allow us to consolidate orders based upon lead times, based upon delivery dates. So if we have, say, 100 orders that all call for the same thing, it's not going to tell us to generate 100 purchase orders. It allows us to consolidate so that we can then bring that information in, look at a vendor and say, hey, this is what we have. We can do everything through that MRP screen, right? And then also looking at, are we on schedule? Where are our work centers? What does that look like? There's a lot of tools within the advanced planning and manufacturing module that allow us to have Gantt charts and have capable to promise dates and have a lot of that information that the system will generate that for you, as opposed to having a person generate it for you. I can't count the number of times that I had to sit through and go through a spreadsheet and say, are we on track with this? Are we on track with this? Have we purchased this, right? Gets old real fast. And that's why we tend to see a lot of turnover in manufacturing. And using an ERP that generates a lot of that data for you helps you focus on the issues at hand, right? This is late. Do I need to expedite it? That being said, within the MRP, there are exceptions. We can set exceptions. So the system will actually generate and say, here's POs that need to be deleted because they're duplicates, or we already have inventory on hand, or we've got a date that's coming up and we need this product so that it can go into other products. Let's expedite this purchase order, or let's expedite this production order. That's going to allow you to focus on making sure that you have your just-in-time deliveries, and then you can spend your time working on how to get your product out the door and make your customers happy, as opposed to, do I have to cut this purchase order now? Right?
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. And I think it also ties in a bit to the adage, you always want to work smarter, not harder. And I think especially now that we're in the 21st century, you can kind of shift that and say, you'd rather have your technology work for you as opposed to you working for the technology. These automation tools that it seems like Acumatica provides can be an incredibly useful resource for your team members to allow to focus on the actual work that they have to do, as opposed to enabling the technology to work in the best way possible.
Yeah, being able to automate the MRP regeneration and look at it, every night, every day, a couple of times a day, once a week, whatever your requirements are, that saves you a lot of time, right? You come in the morning, you open up your dashboard, you say, hey, here's what I need to purchase today. Am I okay with this? Off you go. You hit a button and you've created 100 purchase orders for 100 different items. It's a great way to do it.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And so let's move into cost tracking a little bit, because, that's really a critical aspect to being a really profitable operation, and, it helps drive efficiencies. And so can you dive into a bit how Acumatica's manufacturing module ties into the overall financials of an organization and can create efficiencies when it comes to reporting?
Yeah, of course. So I'm definitely not an accountant. And there's sort of an internal joke around that I don't talk about accounting, but from a manufacturing standpoint, there is a lot that ties into the accounting portion of it, right? We want to be able to have a good cost of goods sold. And within the manufacturing module, we can do that. We can look at any of the overhead costs and standard costs that are going into our work centers, to our labor, to our production environments, to our outside processes, freight costs. All of this can be rolled up into both the production cost as well as a planned cost for the bill of materials. So one of the things that we can do is look at the difference between that standard cost in the bill of materials and what our actual cost was, so we can see production variances, and we can see if there's issues with that. Are things costing us? Do we need to adjust our price? Do we need to adjust our, how we're making it? Are our hours correct? Right? A lot of folks in the manufacturing world tend to have a mindset of, this is what our product cost us, right? And that's a great place to start, right? It's better than saying, let's just make it. We don't care what it costs, right? And within Acumatica, we can really dive into analyzing, does this product actually cost us what we think it does? And where are those costs coming from? Are the costs coming from increased labor? Are they coming from increased overhead? Are they coming from indirect time? Are they coming from unattended time? Or are they coming from a vendor that suddenly started charging us 3 times what we were paying last year, right? And being able to identify that and look at those costs, adding in landed costs. A lot of the times we have freight, and it's one of those items that kind of just gets forgotten about a lot unless you're really focused on that. But Acumatica allows you to break down those landed costs into your cost of your product. And we can add them into a purchase order so that we can see at the end of the day, this product, this little widget that we made has cost us our raw materials, our outside processes, all of that information.
Yeah, and so I think is part of that also identifying scrap associated in the process too?
Yeah, and scrap, depending on the environment that you're in, sometimes scrap can be insignificant amounts. And I used to joke that we used to have a $40,000 coat rack in our shop, because sometimes, depending on where you scrap the parts, it is extremely significant, right? And that can affect, at the end of the day, is your business going to survive, right? And if you're in a high volume manufacturing and you've got a scrap rate of 2%, that could be very different than if you're in a job shop and that scrap rate is 2%, right? So being able to identify your scraps based upon quantities, based upon, overall material, gives you a lot of options within Acumatica so that we can set up, do we want to write this off? Do we want to roll up the cost of scrap within our finished goods, or do we want to write that off and separate that out and then look at that slightly differently, right? So we've got a couple of different options within the scrap setup, which is really beneficial within Acumatica. And we can run reports as far as which products were scrapped, which which work orders had the highest scrap percentage, which operations have the highest scrap center. And one of the things that I used to geek out about was, we would go through and we would look at our scrap by work center and by operation, and we'd be able to identify, hey, it's always this lathe that was having the same issues. Turns out there was something wrong with the equipment itself. By analyzing that data, it allowed us to go through and identify that it wasn't an issue with the product, it wasn't an issue with the process, it was an issue with the equipment, right? Which allowed us to make a business decision. Do we change our lathe out? Do we repair it? Or do we stop using it and move things to a different equipment, right? To a different piece of equipment. So gives you a lot of opportunity to break down that data and start looking at your root cause in your analysis.
Yeah, and it also, that example specifically is a really interesting one because it makes this piece of technology in Acumatica something that also affects your physical operations too. Because to your point, if you have a piece of equipment that isn't operating as efficiently as some of the others, you're going to be able to see that in the data. And that's just a really cool way a really cool example that brings us to life a bit and kind of takes us out of the virtual technological world and apply it to both kind of like the real tangible world around us too. So that's really interesting.
The last thing you want to do is beat up the guy who's running the lathe when it's not his fault, right?
Yeah, right. Exactly. Yeah, for sure. Sometimes it's not a people problem, it's an equipment problem. And technology can help you identify that. So that's really interesting. And so for some of the larger companies that might be on the call that are operating with multiple facilities or warehouses, can Acumatica split those separate areas of the operation with the help of automation? Kind of how does that look in the technology itself?
Yeah, so within the manufacturing module, we can set specific bills of materials per warehouse, right? So if we have 2 warehouses on the opposite sides of the country and we make product very differently within those facilities, we can set a bill of material that can correspond to that warehouse, right? We can also set up transfers. So if we are looking at automating transfers between locations based upon stock levels, maybe we have a distribution warehouse, or we manufacture in Texas and we send things to, I don't know, Georgia, right? And we want to ship everything out of Georgia from there. That we can set up those transfers based upon those replenishment methods to identify when MRP is going to tell us to set those transfers, right? And then also, if we do manufacture them differently, we can have different costing. We can have different bills of materials, different routing. Maybe one does things in-house and another one cuts a purchase order for the same product. We can do that and keep it separate with revisions and the separate bill of materials by warehouse.
Yeah, and I know this is again a little off course, but you mentioned how you can, if you have a warehouse in Texas and then also in Georgia, when it comes to shipping large quantities of items at PC Bennett, we actually offer a proprietary piece of technology that adds onto Acumatica called shipping container management. And while it's called shipping container management, it also handles like trailers and large, if you're transferring really any type of large quantity of materials, whether it be on a container or in a trailer, we're able to kind of associate landed costs with that, even reverse landed costs if you have an estimate and then the estimated price tends to be higher or lower than what the actual physical bill from that shipper is going to be. And all of that feeds directly into financials. So I don't know, again, I'm going a little off script here, but I don't know if you've had any manufacturing clients of ours that have also brought on shipping container management. How did those two kind of play together?
Yeah, so a lot of the clients that we have that are using that container management, the benefit of that is, especially where it comes to the in-transit warehouse, right? And the ability to sort of see what's been made, what's out there, what's in process. And one of the things that we want to give our customers the opportunity to do is to make sure that we know where that product is and how much of that product we have. So that's a really useful tool as far as identifying this is what we have, and then looking at that and saying, okay, I don't need to make it because it's in transit, right? Or we have it somewhere coming in, whether
Yeah,
it's
and
from overseas
that
or between warehouses. So
Yeah, and that also that in-transit warehouse is a unique feature to prevent like overselling or anything like that, because you can mark that in-transit warehouses to not be available for purchasing. And so you have it on your inventory in Acumatica, but then you're not able to sell it because, I mean, heck, it's not even on your shelves yet, you know? So yeah, just a unique feature overall. But going back to actual manufacturing, let's
yeah.
let's let's go back to the core topic here. So can you utilize lot serial, and if so, what are the options surrounding that?
Yeah, so lot serial, again, coming from the aerospace world, I'm very familiar with lot serial tracking of raw materials coming from, serialization of the individual product itself. Acumatica does allow us to do a lot or a serial number, right? A lot number is going to be, we made this at the entire time, it's all one batch. A serial number is going to be specific to a product that was then made within that production order or that batch number. Right? So within Acumatica, we've got a couple of different options for how we identify those. Some of them are when we receive the product. If we get raw material, for example, and we want to track a lot number, we can identify that lot number when it comes in. Right? The vendor sends us a lot number and we say, hey, now we have this lot number. We've got 25 bars of 6061 and it's lot number 123. We can track that when it comes in. Otherwise, we can track those lot numbers or those serial numbers as they go out. And we can have the system auto-generate. So when we're done with a production order number, we can then say we made 50 product, and we're going to have the system auto-generate 50 serial numbers for that particular product. We can set some requirements for, we want a date, we want a month, we want a hard code, maybe we want PCB as the first three letters of our serial number so that we know that we were the ones that made it. Or maybe it's a warehouse or whatever we want. There's a lot of things that we can do around that where we can set criteria for those serial numbers. We can also have a user enterable serial number, so we can identify today's serial number 1, right? Or maybe it's a specific numbering sequence. When we receive the product, we can put in a serial number. When we the shelf and we go to use it in a production order, right? Maybe need to take some resist care which lot number I go to assemble it, right? When I serial number that went 2 hours talking about lot serial. But yeah, in general, there's a lot that we can do with those serial numbers to streamline that. We can also pre-assign serial numbers for parent serial numbers. So maybe I know that I want to call this particular product 12345. I can say this product is going to be 12345, and then later on I can go and I can say I use these products in there, and that way you sort of have that overarching serial number. A lot of the times you would see that on a longer term production order where it might take a couple of days or a couple of weeks or even a couple of months to make that product, and you want to make sure that you're purchasing to that serial number, you're tracking all of your costs to that serial number, and you've got a really good as-built configuration for that serial number. But you might not have all of the lower level serial numbers until later on down the line.
Oh, interesting. Okay. Yeah, that certainly makes sense. So then to shift gears a little bit, I mean, bill of materials that's depending on your business can either be incredibly complex or incredibly simple. And so can you go into kind of how Acumatica can parse that out between the more complex and the more simple?
Yeah. So one of the things when I first started with Acumatica a couple of years ago is that I noticed is it does bill of materials very differently from a lot of other ERPs out there. A lot of other ERPs that I have experience with have a bill of materials, which is going to be a list of items, and then they have a routing card for your process that you make, how you make that product, right? Acumatica combines your bill of materials, your operations, your instructions, and any outside processes, right? So it gives you one location where you can control everything that goes into how you make a product. When you're talking about product realization and you're talking about how do we make this, you don't have to go to 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 different places to identify, here's my work instructions, here's my order of operations, here's my work centers, here's the products that I need to go into here, here's my raw components, right? It's all in one spot. And tying back into the engineering change control, you can roll all of that into one. You can have operation 10 is our assembly work center or our bandsaw, right? And then within that, we can actually say, I need, for this operation, I need 6061 6-inch bar, and I need 4 screws, right? And then within the steps, within the sequence, we have that operation, we have our work center, we can add our costs associated with our work center in there. And then we can also add, maybe I need to cut this at 3.5 inches at a 45-degree angle. So I can add that specific requirement within that bill of materials. So every time I do a production order, I now have my work instructions specifically in there. If I have a drawing number that needs to be identified, or I need to, maybe we cut on the bandsaw, we've machined it on our CNC machine, and we need to use a specific vise or a tool. We can identify those tools required at the bill of materials level. And then we can also go in and identify the operations or drawing numbers or anything like that.
Yeah, it seems like it's a pretty powerful aspect of the Acumatica platform. So that's wonderful, because I'm sure that'll help a lot of organizations make sure they're being as streamlined as possible with that. And so I think the last prepared question we had is Acumatica able to handle outside processing? And can you tell me a little bit about what that would look like?
Yeah, so obviously in a manufacturing shop, depending on the type of work that you're doing, you're going to see manufacturing that needs outside processing, right? Maybe it's plating, maybe it's burnishing or sanding or powder coating. Maybe you just send an entire part to somebody and you need to get it wire EDM'd at a separate shop because you don't have an EDM. You can set an outside process work center, and then from there you can identify that outside process on the bill of materials. So if you have a particular vendor, you can set that vendor. If you don't have a vendor, you can fill it in at the time that you need to create a purchase order. But what it does is it allows you to create a purchase order for that outside process, for that subcontracted work. And it will allow you to tie those costs in, tie the purchase order cost, tie everything in to that outside process manufacturer. We can add in the landed cost if there's shipping requirements or anything like that. And at the end of the day, everything is tied in and linked to that production order. So if we have an issue, somebody can come in and they can say, what was my as-built configuration? We can pull up the PO for that outside process if there was an issue with the paint, right? And we didn't do it in-house. We sent it to Joe's paint shop down the street. We pull up that purchase order and we say, hey, this is when we did it. Joe, can you tell us what happened down there? Right?
Yeah, that's very interesting. And so I just want to wrap up that kind of initial part of this presentation just by saying thank you. I think you've provided some really both like tangible, like we talked about, some tangible real world examples of how the technology can really aid an organization, especially in its manufacturing operation. And so I'm sure our audience is really appreciative of you sharing kind of your past experience, both in aerospace, but also the work that you've done with our clients in helping them bring on Acumatica. And so we did get a couple questions that rolled in. And so if you just have a moment, I'm just going to provide you, I'm just going to ask those real quick. So what is the standard manufacturing size in Acumatica?
The standard manufacturing size?
Yeah.
So out of the box, standard manufacturing size is going to be 1. But you can identify, hey, we have a lot size. We always make these in batches of 5 or 10 or 50 or 100. So depending on the bill of materials, we can set that batch size or that lot size as well. And that would actually be set at the item level. So a lot of the times, it doesn't make sense to make 1. You always want to make 5. So within Acumatica, we do have the option of doing both a lot size. So maybe we have a jig that holds 5. We always do 5, but maybe it doesn't make sense to manufacture less than 10 because our setup is very intense, right? So we have, in addition to the lot size, we have a minimum order size as well. So we can set requirements and say, this is sort of my breaking point for what I want to set up for. Right.
Yeah, and so again, just kind of spitballing here, but that's not locked in at implementation, right? Would you be able to adjust that throughout kind of the course of a business?
Yeah, we could go in and you can make that change just for a day if you really wanted to. It is at the item level, but that's something you can change whenever you want.
Okay, yeah, I just wanted to make sure it's like, because I know Acumatica is a relatively configurable system, so just wanted to make sure that was kind of included in some of the customizations that you're able to do. Okay, and so the last question we received was, is the system able to make overhead calculations? I think we might have touched on this a little bit, but if you could dive into that in a little bit deeper detail, that'd be wonderful.
We definitely, we talked about that very briefly. Again, overhead calculations kind of falls into accounting, but we'll no, we have a lot of options for overhead calculations. We can do it as a standard on the work center. That's generally where we're going to see those overhead calculations based upon, how much it costs you to run that machine, right? A lot of people will take their utility expenses, their rent expenses. If there's additional costs associated with fluids and tooling and stuff like that, that are just sort of general within that. Maintenance costs, all that fun stuff gets rolled up into the work center overhead. We can also identify work center by quantity, variable quantity, hours. So maybe the Bridgeport is, you've got one guy who runs it and he's been running it for 50 years. And that it costs a lot more than every other machine because he's very, very focused on the details, right? we can add in and maybe it's just on a particular product, right? We can add in those overhead calculations both at the work center level and at the individual production order or bill of materials order. So we can add in costs. Maybe there's particular processes that we do all the time, but on this particular product, it's very, very critical that our paint is 100%, no imperfections, cosmetic critical. We can add in additional overhead instead of adding in additional time. Right? So gives us a lot of options for adding costs or identifying where those costs are coming from.
Yeah, that's fantastic. So it doesn't look like there are any more questions that rolled in. So I just want to wrap up today's session by giving a big thank you to everyone who attended and for submitting those couple questions that we heard. I hope you're leaving here with some great takeaways on how you can enhance your manufacturing operations with PC Bennett and Acumatica. There are some emails on the screen, so please don't hesitate to reach out if you have any questions, whether that's to Jeremy. Jeremy, again, thank you so much for coming on today. His email is jeremyd@pcbennett.com, or you can reach out to our sales and marketing teams at hello@pcbennett.com. We're very willing to help you in any way we can when it comes to your ERP journey, as always. And so, Jeremy, just one last time, I want to say thank you, and I hope everyone has a wonderful rest of their day.
All right, perfect. Thank you, Strati. Really appreciate it.